They said he couldn't die. They said his eyes could see through a man's soul, that his words bent the will of the mighty, and that fate itself whispered in his ear. Some called him a prophet, others a devil wrapped in human flesh. But history does not concern itself with legends. It remembers only what survives. And Rasputin, even in death, refused to fade. The snow-laden streets of St. Petersburg shivered under the weight of a restless empire. Beyond the gilded walls of the Winter Palace, the city murmured with unease, a growing tension hidden beneath courtly laughter and clinking crystal. In that world of silk and deceit, he arrived, a peasant in worn robes, smelling of earth and incense, his piercing gaze unsettling even the most seasoned aristocrats. The whispers began at once. Who was this man? How had he found himself among the Tsar's closest circle? And why did the Tsarina's eyes light up with something dangerously close to hope? He moved with an ease that defied his station, a man who spoke not like a courtier, but as if the heavens themselves had given him permission to walk among kings. To those who doubted, he offered miracles. His hands upon the ailing heir, a single touch, and the child's suffering eased. The Tsarina, desperate for salvation, clung to him as one drowning clings to the promise of air. But power, even when wrapped in devotion, is a dangerous gift. And as Rasputin stepped deeper into the heart of the empire, he could already feel the unseen knives beginning to sharpen. Power in the Russian court was never silent. It whispered, slithered, coiled around throats like a tightening noose. Rasputin felt it long before the murmurs turned to open defiance. The nobles watched him with suspicion, their finely gloved hands twitching over untouched glasses of wine as he moved through the palace halls. He did not belong here, they said. He was an insult to tradition, a charlatan corrupting the very heart of the empire. Yet no one dared to challenge him directly. Not when the Tsarina herself shielded him, her faith unwavering, her gratitude immeasurable. But faith was not enough to silence fear. The more the Tsarina leaned on him, the more the court recoiled. They saw in him a shadow stretching too far, a man whose influence defied rank and reason. Some whispered that he was a demon, others that he held the Romanovs under some unholy spell. Rasputin, however, knew the truth. Power is not given. It is taken, shaped, wielded by those who understand its weight. And while the court schemed behind velvet drapes, he walked among them with a knowing smile, daring them to strike before he was ready. The child had been dying. Again, pale as the winter sky, shivering, fevered, on the edge of slipping beyond the reach of mortal hands. The court physicians hovered, their knowledge bound by science, their hands tied by failure. It was Rasputin that Tsarina called for, her voice cracking with desperation. And Rasputin came, as he always did, offering something far more potent than medicine: certainty. His words were a balm to her fears, his presence a fortress against despair. He touched the boy's forehead, murmured in a language only the heavens understood, and left the room without looking back. By morning, the boy had stirred. The fever had broken. The Tsarina wept with relief, swearing that God had spoken through Rasputin's hands. The court, however, did not celebrate. They did not see a miracle. They saw a man who had ensnared their empress with something far more dangerous than magic. Power. The kind that could not be explained, the kind that could not be controlled. And so, the whispers grew louder, the gloved hands clenched tighter. Somewhere in the halls of the palace, a nobleman made a quiet promise. This peasant would not be allowed to decide the fate of an empire. The court had become a stage, its players moving in shadows, their smiles laced with venom. Rasputin felt the change, sensed the weight of unspoken threats lingering in the air like a storm waiting to break. He was no stranger to enemies. Power, after all, bred resentment, but this was different. The glances were sharper, the whispers more urgent. The nobility was no longer content with rumors. They sought action. And yet, Rasputin did not retreat. He moved through the palace as if untouchable, his confidence an open defiance to those who wished him gone. But confidence alone could not silence the growing unrest. Outside the palace walls, Russia trembled on the brink of something irreparable. The people suffered, their patience with the monarchy thinning like ice beneath an approaching spring. Revolution was no longer a distant threat. It was a reality creeping closer with each passing day. Rasputin understood this far better than the court did. He had seen the hunger in the streets, the fire in the eyes of men who had nothing left to lose. The Romanovs were blind, wrapped in luxury, deaf to the rumblings of the world beyond their walls. And if they would not listen, then perhaps their so-called savior would have to prepare for the inevitable. They came to him in the dark, those whom society had cast aside, those whose voices were drowned beneath the weight of noble arrogance. Women seeking solace, men desperate for answers, beggars and thieves who whispered their fears to the man who walked untouched through the corridors of power. Rasputin listened, not because he pitied them, but because he understood them. He was one of them once, a peasant who had clawed his way out of the dirt and into the halls of kings. And if he could do it, why couldn't they? This, more than his miracles, was what made him dangerous. He was not bound by the rules of the court, not shackled by noble bloodlines or empty traditions. He did not look upon the downtrodden as lesser beings. He saw them as tools, as fire waiting for a spark. And the nobles, they saw this too. They saw a man who could command the loyalty of the desperate, a man whose influence stretched far beyond the palace walls. It was no longer a matter of disliking him. It was a matter of survival. Rasputin had become a threat that could not be ignored. And threats, in the world of kings and traitors, never lasted long. Rasputin had learned long ago that power was not about titles or birthright. It was about perception. A man who was feared, revered, and whispered about in the same breath held far more sway than a prince wrapped in silk. But power had its price. The court no longer saw him as a mere nuisance. They saw him as a disease, spreading through the empire, infecting even the throne itself. And so the knives came closer. The polite invitations turned colder. The once hidden glares now barely masked. They had not yet struck, but the message was clear. His time was running short. The Tsarina, oblivious or unwilling to see the shifting tides, clung to him more fiercely than ever. She called him her protector, the only man she could trust. It was a dangerous devotion, one that painted her as weak and him as a parasite. Even the Tsar, once indifferent to court gossip, now seemed uneasy. Rasputin could see it in his eyes, the doubt creeping in, the quiet questioning of whether the man they called a holy healer had become something else entirely. But Rasputin had come too far to retreat. If they wanted him gone, they would have to rip him from the palace with their own hands. It was a party, one of many, an extravagant distraction from the fractures splitting the empire apart. The chandeliers gleamed, the laughter was forced, and Rasputin, for the first time, truly saw the rot beneath the gold. The nobles who despised him still smiled in his presence. Their words dipped in honeyed poison, their gestures calculated. They believed themselves untouchable, believing that their names and titles would shield them from the storm that raged outside the palace walls. They did not see what Rasputin saw. A man who understands his own mortality is dangerous. A man who has accepted it is unstoppable. Rasputin sipped his wine, meeting the gaze of the men who plotted his downfall, and smiled. They were fools. The empire was crumbling beneath their feet, and yet they still wasted their energy conspiring against a single man. They did not realize that killing Rasputin would not save them. The people would not rise for their nobles. They would rise against them. And in that moment, surrounded by enemies in silk, Rasputin understood the truth. He would not have to destroy them. They would do it themselves. The letter arrived in the dead of night, slipped beneath his door like a whisper from the grave. No name, no signature, just a single line scrawled in hurried ink. Leave now or die soon. Rasputin chuckled as he traced the words with his fingers. A final warning, or a feeble attempt to unnerve him? He had faced death before, had danced with it in the alleys of Siberia and the halls of power alike. Fear was a tool for weaker men. He had no use for it. Still, he was not blind. The air in the palace had thickened, the weight of inevitable violence pressing against the gilded walls. The Tsarina, unaware or unwilling to see the danger, begged him to stay, her voice frantic with devotion. But Rasputin knew better. The nobles were no longer content to whisper. They were preparing to act. He could run, vanish into the snow, disappear as easily as he had emerged. But what would that prove? Power was not in retreat, it was in defiance. If they wanted his blood, they would have to spill it with their own hands. The invitation was almost laughable in its predictability. A nobleman's estate, a night of wine and revelry, an olive branch wrapped in thorns. Rasputin accepted without hesitation. He arrived as he always did, unbothered, unafraid, his presence an insult to those who wished him gone. The men who greeted him wore smiles too wide, laughter that rang hollow. He drank with them, jested with them, let them believe, for a fleeting moment, that he was as foolish as they hoped. The first glass of wine was smooth, rich with the taste of conspiracy. The second, heavier, carrying the weight of expectation. They watched him, waiting for the poison to take hold, waiting for the monster to fall. But Rasputin merely chuckled, his fingers tapping idly against the rim of his cup. He had always known this night would come. He had foreseen their trembling hands, their desperate need to believe they could kill what they did not understand. Let them try. Death had never been his master. It had always been his companion. After a while, everyone left the table to gather in another room, assuming that by now the poison would have already defeated Rasputin. Hours later, while the conspirators debated what to do with the body, Yusupov decided to return to the crime scene to check. As he approached, Rasputin suddenly opened his eyes and, with a fierce gaze, stood up and attempted to escape, letting out a terrifying scream. Stunned, Yusupov ran to call the other conspirators, who quickly fired multiple shots at Rasputin, hitting him in the chest and back. He fell once again, but still writhed, clinging to life in an almost supernatural manner. To ensure he was dead, the assassins violently beat his body and tied him up. Still fearing that he might revive once more, they decided to dispose of the corpse by throwing it into the icy Neva River. The body was wrapped in cloth and chained before being cast into the frozen waters. Later, when it was found, forensic examiners discovered that Rasputin had died not from the gunshots or poison but possibly from drowning, as water was found in his lungs. Rasputin's death was shrouded in legends and mystery, reinforcing his reputation as an almost supernatural figure. His assassination, far from saving the Russian monarchy, only hastened its downfall. Just over a year later, the Russian Revolution swept the Romanovs from power, ending centuries of imperial rule. Rasputin, even in death, remained a symbol of the dynasty's collapse, a figure wrapped in mystery and feared until his final moments. Did you enjoy this fascinating story? Then don't forget to like the video to support the channel and ensure more epic content like this. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any historical sagas filled with mystery, power, and twists. Share this video with your history-loving friends and help keep the legends of the past alive.